As anyone acquainted with the trials of being labeled the nerdy kid can affirm, encountering the school's towering figure looming over you invariably triggers apprehension. It required repeated calling of my name to divert my attention from the barren pages of my notebook, rather than subjecting me to the customary taunts about my spectacles, attire, or hairstyle. However, he bestowed upon me a grin and inquired, "Hey there, newcomer, fancy a round of caps?" I shook my head, having recently relocated to the town with my family, rendering me oblivious to the local customs. Caps, a re-emerging craze sweeping through the school, proved to be a notorious pastime. Revered by some and vilified by concerned parents fearing its role in fostering gambling tendencies, caps acquired an illicit allure. Ironically, parental apprehensions merely fueled its clandestine allure, as adolescents eagerly embraced the forbidden thrill, often wagering their meager allowances and possessions. The rules are deceptively simple. At the start of a game, each player grabs 4 random bottle caps from the set. Each cap would have a number written on the inside of it, showing the amount of points said cap is worth. The numbers can be 5, 10, 15, 20, or 25. The players then take turns guessing how many points the other has. Every time they are wrong, their opponent must tell them to guess either higher or lower during their next turn. If a player suspects that they are being misdirected, they can call their opponent out. A player wins by either guessing the exact number of points their opponent has, catching them lying, or being called out for lying when they actually weren't. Regardless of the outcome, both players flip their caps at the end of the game, revealing their score and proving that they haven't cheated. Needless to say, I lost my lunch money that day, but a few pounds was a small price for the thrill of taking part in something I wasn't supposed to. That's how it started. After a few weeks, my own parents could hardly recognize me. I had stopped studying, which my grades inevitably began to reflect. The only reason I went to school was to play caps with the lads. Probably beginning to suspect what was going on, my mom started packing my lunch instead of giving me money. Unfortunately, that only resulted in me sneaking stuff out of the house that I could gamble with instead. I was much too young to grasp the concept of serious addiction, let alone realize that I was spiraling headfirst towards it. The persuasion of my peers led me to forsake formal education altogether. Our weekdays were spent lurking behind the dilapidated gymnasium, indulging in smoking, defacing walls with crude drawings, and naturally, engaging in caps matches. Yet there existed another allure to that desolate locale. Periodically, a peculiar elder from across the street would amble down to pay us a visit. Looking back, it was evident that the man was ailing. Each encounter revealed his deteriorating condition, his emaciated frame growing more gaunt with each passing day, his countenance marred by festering sores, and his eyes eternally bloodshot. Devoid of an appellation, we dubbed him Mr. Sag, owing to his penchant for donning outrageously oversized sweaters. According to his ramblings, he and his cohorts were the progenitors of our beloved pastime during their youth. Typically, he would observe our matches for a brief spell before retreating to his abode. Yet, on occasion, he'd issue challenges, brandishing the same crumpled 50-pound note as a tantalizing reward for the victor, a princely sum for a 12-year-old in the early 90s. Although we remained bereft of triumph, despite numerous attempts, his uncanny knack for evading defeat raised suspicions. Whenever the odds seemed stacked against him, he'd miraculously guess correctly, leaving us flummoxed. Convinced of foul play, we speculated about his methods. The uniformity of the bottle caps, sourced from the same brand of soda, should have precluded any advantage. Either he had an accomplice or possessed an extraordinary acuity for minute details. Perhaps it was time to level the playing field. Though cheating at caps was deemed reprehensible and invited swift retribution if exposed, under the circumstances, we deemed it a justified response. A complete set comprised 4 caps of each denomination, adding up to 20 caps per set. Imprinting any form of distinguishing feature on them would have been too conspicuous, particularly if Mr. Sag possessed such keen perception. To our collective astonishment, it was I who proposed the strategy we ultimately adopted. The scheme entailed crafting a new manipulated set containing 16 caps, all valued at 10 points, along with 4 caps worth 15 points. Only these 4 would be discreetly marked, allowing us to identify them amidst the others. The rationale behind this design was to ensure that each player always knew the contents of their opponent's selection, while also preventing the presence of more than 4 caps of the same value between them, which would have exposed our ruse. The stage was set. All that remained was for our esteemed guest to make his appearance. Mr. Sag arrived late the following afternoon, offering us a casual wave before settling into his customary spot, an improvised bench fashioned from plywood and a few cinder blocks. Cooper, the eldest among us, wasted no time in challenging the old man to a rematch. Mr. Sag responded with a placid smile, shrugged, and joined us at the table. The rest of us discreetly stepped back, having swapped the genuine set for the altered one, trying our best to contain our excitement. The bottle caps were arrayed before them. Even at a glance, I could discern the 4 marked caps from the others. 3 bore faint scratches in different spots, while the 4th displayed smudges on its logo. We endeavored to make these imperfections appear innocuous and inadvertent. As per protocol, both participants took turns shuffling the caps before making their selections. Cooper deferred to his venerable adversary to choose first. I could discern that the old man possessed 3 caps worth 10 points and 1 worth 15. In response, Cooper swiftly claimed the remaining 15-point caps and 1 10-point cap. Both inspected their selections, or at least pretended to in one instance. Thus, the game commenced. Cooper ventured his guess first. 25. He declared triumphantly, though incorrectly. He likely reasoned that winning on his initial attempt might arouse suspicion. The old man double-checked his tally, shaking his head while maintaining his serene smile. Higher, he murmured. His voice was feeble and hoarse, as if he perpetually struggled for breath. Now it was his turn to guess. How about 70? Cooper clicked his tongue disapprovingly, reclining back with a thumbs-down gesture. The entire match spanned merely 3 rounds. Mr. Sag teetered on the brink of success with each subsequent attempt, compelling Cooper to make a decisive move and end the suspense. 45. With that utterance, it concluded. I couldn't fathom it. Our scheme had indeed borne fruit. Cooper shot me a knowing glance, his grin now wider than ever, to which I couldn't help but respond in kind. Extending his hand towards the stunned figure opposite him, Cooper anticipated his rightful reward. We were all caught off guard when the man's door expression transformed into uproarious laughter. He chortled, wheezed, and then chortled some more. I'm uncertain what reaction we had anticipated, but it certainly wasn't this. Before a perplexed Cooper could retract his hand, Mr. Sag seized it firmly with both of his own. He vigorously shook the boy's entire arm before triumphantly laying the coveted 50-pound note before him. Never had I witnessed the old man so animated. He seemed genuinely elated by his defeat, as if a burdensome weight had been lifted from his shoulders. We watched in dumbfounded silence as he ambled over to the nearby crossroads, his laughter and cheers echoing through the air. It felt surreal observing him standing there, tapping his feet against the pavement in jubilation as passers-by circled around him. He seemed to be awaiting something. Vehicles slowed down, assuming he intended to cross, yet the weathered old fellow simply waved them off with a smile. I reckon we got the better of him, lads, Cooper remarked, his tone tinged with self-satisfaction as he flaunted his prize before each of us. I ought to have known better than to anticipate recognition for my contribution. Suddenly, Mr. Sag spun around dramatically. Our gazes locked. He smirked, executed a mock bow, and to our utter horror, leaped backward into the path of an oncoming truck. The driver had no opportunity to react. The initial impact sent the ragged man tumbling beneath the wheels, where his body was effortlessly crushed beneath the massive vehicle's weight. There ensued a sickening crunch, followed by a moist, squelching noise that prompted me to avert my gaze. All around me, cries of alarm and bewilderment rent the air. Ambulance! Somebody call an ambulance! A woman's cry pierced the air. Yet, it was abundantly clear that any such action would arrive too late. The other children swiftly dispersed. I felt Cooper's grip on my elbow, attempting to drag me away. But my feet seemed rooted to the spot. It was as if invisible anchors held me firm. After a futile tug or two, he abandoned his efforts and dashed off. To this day, I ponder what stayed my feet. Shock, perhaps, or a gnawing sense of culpability. Regardless, with hesitant strides, I approached the calamitous scene. A childish part of me clung to hope, imagining that somehow all would be set right. Alas, such fantasies shattered upon squeezing through the throng of spectators, both concerned and morbidly intrigued, congregated around the casualty. Scattered across the ebony asphalt lay an indiscernible heap of flesh. The remaining appendages twisted at grotesque angles, their agony unspoken yet palpable. Bones jutted through the man's oversized garment, shielding the carnage too ghastly to fathom. His midsection crushed, cleaving him in twain, leaving naught but a grisly trail of innards strewn along the road. Only his visage, eerily upturned toward the heavens, retained a semblance of composure. Suddenly, his lips stirred. "Please, let me go. Please, let me go," he intoned, a mantra of despair. His survival defied belief, though to him, it was a torment beyond measure. My stomach churned as his bloodshot eyes locked onto mine amidst the crowd. A shameful warmth trickled down my leg, his grimace contorted with rage. "You," he spat, teeth shattered. "You deceitful wretch. What have you wrought? She won't release me. She'll never release me. All because of you." The horrified onlookers turned their gaze upon me. It was too much. With a cry, I shoved past them, fleeing as swiftly as my trembling legs permitted. I never divulged the events of that day, not even to my kin. It lingered, an unspoken pact among us. Ironically, the ordeal led many of us to forsake CAPS and return to our studies. Yet that would have been a fitting end if my tale concluded there. Years went by. I was a few days removed from my 17th birthday. It was Sunday and I had the apartment to myself for once, which didn't happen very often. I was planning on spending the evening eating crisps and watching the most raunchy, rubbish TV show I could find when, suddenly, the phone rang. With nobody else around, I begrudgingly rolled off the sofa and sauntered over to pick it up. It was Cooper. It took me a minute to recognize his voice. We hadn't spoken in over 3 years, not for any particular reason. We just grew apart. Although he tried to maintain a friendly tone at first, it was clear that there was more brimming beneath the surface. It didn't take long for the desperation to leak through. His voice cracked, and I could practically hear him holding back tears. He started telling me how sorry he was and that he had no other choice. I did my best to encourage him to be less vague, but it made no difference. He just kept on apologizing. I decided to just wait for him to calm down before trying to make sense of his babbling. "Listen," he finally said. "You're at your place, right? Go check if your door and windows are locked and call the cops. Tell them that somebody's trying to break in or something. Just trust me, please." I made an effort to extract more information, but my concerns remained unacknowledged. He kept insisting that I wouldn't believe him, and that telling me would only make me think that he was playing a prank on me. He asked if my folks were around. I said no. Shit. Fuck. Okay. Panic was starting to set in again. "Okay, I'll call the cops for you. Just make sure everything's locked tight and find a place to hide. Or, you know what, better yet, go over to your neighbors, but do it fast. You don't want to be trapped outside when he gets there. Go, now." And with that, he disconnected the call. Slowly, I returned the handset to its cradle, extinguished every light, and approached the nearest window. The outside world lay shrouded in darkness, raindrops tracing erratic paths down the glass. Perhaps Cooper's deliberate ambiguity had been a stroke of wisdom, compelling me to treat the threat with the gravity it deserved. Pacing the room, I weighed my options. Residing on the ground floor, the specter of intrusion loomed, a sinister possibility. Glancing toward the narrow entryway, I contemplated seeking refuge with the kindly neighbors upstairs, certain they'd offer solace upon hearing my plight. Screw it, I resolved, mindful of the dire consequences awaiting those who ignore ominous signs. Seizing the keys, I made for the door, only to encounter an abrupt halt. Scholars debate the boundaries of human deformity, yet in that moment, faced with the abomination before me, such distinctions seemed trivial. That which stood beyond the threshold, illuminated by the harsh corridor light, defied all semblance of humanity. A skeletal hand intercepted the closing door, freezing me in place. Before me stood a grotesque amalgam of bone, decrepit flesh, and corroded metal, a macabre fusion. Draped in a tattered overcoat, its form held together by wire and rebar, it exuded a palpable malevolence. Its face, though warped and withered, bore a haunting familiarity. "Mr. Sag, is it truly you?" I ventured, met only by a silent, eerie smile. With slow, deliberate steps, it advanced, a crowbar trailing in its wake. "Your acquaintance divulged your whereabouts, confessing your complicity," it murmured, its voice a mere whisper. "He disclosed your scheme from its inception." As I attempted to voice my objections, he brandished his makeshift weapon against the wall, sending splinters flying and driving me to shrink back in terror. Though the urge to cry out for aid surged within me, I sensed he would tolerate no such outcry. "Sit," he commanded. Swallowing hard, I complied, sinking onto the plush carpet. Mr. Sag nodded, gently shutting the door behind him, enveloping us in darkness save for the flickering glow of the television. While his ghastly visage inspired dread, the obscurity that cloaked his form was arguably more unsettling. The macabre figure lingered in the entrance hall before slowly advancing toward me, each step a sinister echo. My mind raced through a catalog of dire possibilities. With a sickening crackle, his joints protested as he lowered himself before me. A foul odor assaulted my senses, a testament to decay and neglect. Bathed in the eerie blue light of the TV, his features twisted into half-illumination, while the rest remained veiled. From his pockets emerged a cascade of bottle caps, laid out meticulously between us. "Is this the crux of your grievance?" "We were children, ignorant, and naive," I stammered, seeking absolution. But the hollow man paid little heed to my pleas. Arranging the 20 caps methodically, he gestured for me to shuffle them, a grim reminder of the stakes at hand. Victory promised a chance at survival, while defeat condemned me to face the wrath of an undead fiend wielding a crowbar. Facing this putrid adversary, we each selected our quartet of caps, silently tallying our scores. My senses pulsed with anxiety, for I held a 10, a 20, and 2 25s, yielding a precarious total of 80. Even numbers, easily guessed, forebode a perilous outset. Mr. Sag initiated the game with a modest bid, 50, a strategic move, neither too close nor too distant from the mark I sought to evade. Now, the onus rested upon me to decide whether it merited deviating from his estimate. After some deliberation, I must confess, higher, I conceded. He acknowledged my choice, signifying my turn. Uncertain where to commence, I opted for 50 as well. "Lower," he murmured. It was common knowledge that none had ever outplayed him through honest means. The objective now was merely to prolong the game, buying time to devise an escape strategy. His subsequent bid, 60. With even less assurance, I countered, higher. I ought to have deceived him, yet once more I found myself incapable. Once again, the onus fell upon me. 30. His countenance was inscrutable, akin to playing against an impassive statue. Lower. If his claim proved genuine, I was left with only two choices, 20, the minimum score, or 25, assuming his intent wasn't to mislead me from the outset. 70. I was cornered. How could I maintain composure with death's pallid visage glaring at me? Another round would likely spell my demise unless I devised a means to stall. Pretending he erred might delay the inevitable, yet an intuition nagged that he would discern my deceit regardless. Suddenly, a recollection surfaced, a detail I clung to since the intersection incident. Its relevance was dubious, but worth a gamble, if only to buy a fleeting reprieve. And who might this she be? As my inquiry gained traction, I observed his subtle tensing, prompting me to delve deeper, infusing my tone with a hint more urgency. In our earlier exchange, you mentioned that she refuses to release you. What does that signify? Mr. Sagg's gaze shifted downward, contemplating the sorry state of his form. His finger traced the wires binding his withered flesh, his eyes betraying a profound sense of regret and sorrow. I was a lad, much like you when we first met. I grew weary of incessant defeat, he began, pausing after each phrase, as if anticipating a malevolent intervention. Yet, when none came, he continued, a perpetual loser, never the victor. A dry chuckle punctuated his words. Then, she appeared to me. Drawing closer, he cupped a hand around his mouth, his wary eyes scanning the shadowed surroundings. His breath evoked a rising bile in my throat, urging me to scan the darkness. My gaze fell upon the abandoned crowbar lying across his lap. A tremor coursed through my palm. Lady Luck, he whispered. She offered me a deal, and I took it. Now she won't let me go until. Sensing a fleeting opportunity, I lunged forward, seizing the steel bar and thrusting its twisted end into his neck. The impact sent him sprawling. Retreating against the wall, I rose cautiously, observing the absence of blood, his flesh yielding like paper. As he groped for the embedded tool, I seized one of Mum's ornamental pots, shattering it against his skull before fleeing. I stumbled down the single flight of stairs, and to my surprise and great relief, found 2 officers waiting for me at the bottom. All 3 of us heard the sound of glass shattering. When the cops went up to investigate, they only found a broken window. They searched the alleyways and then the whole block, but, predictably, discovered nobody matching my intruder's description. Of course, I spared them the more unbelievable parts of my account. They would have probably assumed that I was high if I told them that some Frankenstein's monster-looking bastard had broken into my home and forced me to play caps with him. I never heard from Cooper again. He was the one who rang the cops, so I can only presume that they had some questions for him as well. If they did, I was never informed of the outcome. He had moved several times since we lost contact, so I had no idea where to find him. For all I know, Mr. Sagg could have gone back and finished the job, though I doubt that. If he wanted to just straight up kill either of us, he would have done it. In fact, I don't think he was ever the real villain to begin with. He was but a symptom of something far more malevolent that's still out there, preying on the unsuspecting and gullible among us. It's been over 2 decades. I've been through a divorce, married again, and had 2 kids that are currently in their preteens. This is the first time I'm telling my story exactly how it happened. Why am I bringing it up now, you ask? It was my turn to drive the kids to school this morning. My daughter forgot her backpack, so I went up to her room to fetch it. When I picked it off the floor, however, I felt something jiggle in one of the side pockets. The sound was all too familiar. I looked inside. What I found were exactly 20 bottle caps, each with a number written on the inside of it. I think we'll need to have a talk.